Romans 13 is one of the most quoted political passages in the New Testament, and one of the easiest to misuse. Sometimes it is treated as if Paul gives every government a blank check. The passage is quoted, the conversation is closed, and anyone who raises a question about justice, conscience, or abuse of power is told that faithful Christians simply submit. Other times the passage is pushed aside as if authority itself does not matter. In that version, Romans 13 is treated like an embarrassment, or as if Paul could not possibly mean what he says. Both moves are too simple. Romans 13 does teach that governing authority is real. Christians are not free to despise order, ignore public responsibility, or pretend that civil life is spiritually meaningless. But Romans 13 does not teach that government is ultimate. That distinction matters. So in this study, we are going to walk slowly through Romans 13 verses 1 to 7 and ask what the passage actually says in context, what it does not say, and how it fits with the Bible's wider witness. Start with the immediate setting. Romans 12 has just called believers to a life shaped by the mercies of God. Paul tells them not to be conformed to this age, but to be transformed by the renewing of the mind. He calls them to sincere love, humility, patience in affliction, hospitality, blessing persecutors, living peaceably so far as it depends on them, and not taking vengeance into their own hands. That matters because Romans 13 does not appear in a vacuum. Paul has already been forming a community that lives under God's mercy, refuses revenge, and practices public good in a hostile world. Then he turns to governing authorities. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, he says. For there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. That sentence is strong. Paul does not present civil authority as a meaningless human invention. He does not tell Christians that public order is irrelevant because Christ is Lord. In fact, because God is Lord, authority has a real place in God's ordered world. But notice the direction of the logic. Authority is from God. That means authority is not God. It is derivative. It is accountable. It is not self-created, self-justifying, or unlimited. This is where many misreadings begin. If authority is from God, some people assume every action of authority carries God's approval. But the Bible does not reason that way. Kings can be installed by God and still judged by God. Empires can be used within providence and still be guilty for arrogance, violence, and idolatry. The Old Testament gives us that pattern again and again. Pharaoh has real power, but he is judged. Nebuchadnezzar has real authority, but he is humbled. Israel's kings sit on David's throne, but the prophets confront them when they practice injustice. Authority is real, and authority is answerable. Romans 13 fits that world. Paul says rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. He speaks of authority as God's servant for good, an avenger who carries out wrath on the wrongdoer. He mentions taxes, revenue, respect, and honor. In other words, Paul is describing the proper function of governing authority. Government is meant to restrain evil, uphold order, and serve public justice. It is not meant to be worshipped. It is not meant to define truth. It is not meant to become the church. It is not meant to take the place of God. That helps us hear both the force and the limits of the passage. The force is that Christians should not be casually rebellious, contemptuous, or disorderly. Paul gives no permission for believers to treat public life as beneath them. He does not baptize lawlessness as spirituality. But the limit is equally important. Romans 13 cannot mean that obedience to rulers is absolute, because the same Bible gives us faithful disobedience when rulers command what God forbids or forbid what God commands. In Exodus, the Hebrew midwives disobey Pharaoh's command to kill male children. In Daniel, Daniel continues to pray when the law forbids it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse idolatrous worship even under threat of death. In Acts 5, the apostles say, "We must obey God rather than men." Those passages do not cancel Romans 13. They help us read it responsibly. Romans 13 teaches ordered submission to governing authority as a real and good structure under God. It does not teach worship of power. It does not erase conscience before God. It does not make injustice righteous because an official commanded it. That is why the phrase "under God" is so important. Christian submission is never ultimate submission to the state. Ultimate allegiance belongs to the Lord. This also explains why Romans 13 should not be turned into anti-authority rhetoric. Some readers notice the dangers of abusive power and then conclude that Paul must be ignored. But that is not faithful reading either. The Bible is honest about corrupt rulers, and still recognizes that public order is better than chaos, that justice matters, that civil life has moral weight, and that Christians should honor what is honorable. Paul's own life shows this complexity. He can appeal to his Roman citizenship. He can insist on legal process. He can submit to authorities in one moment and resist unlawful treatment in another. He can preach Christ as Lord in an empire where lordship language had public meaning. So the question is not, does Romans 13 make government ultimate? No. The question is also not, can Christians dismiss governing authority whenever they dislike it? No. The better question is, what does faithful, non-idolatrous, God-directed public obedience look like here? That question requires more than slogans. It asks whether we are honoring authority without worshiping it. It asks whether we are resisting evil without becoming contemptuous or reckless. It asks whether our political instincts are being formed by the mercy, humility, enemy love, patience, and non-vengeance of Romans 12. It asks whether we remember that the state can be God's servant in a limited sense, while Jesus alone is Lord in the ultimate sense. This is why context changes the point. Romans 13 is not a weapon for silencing every concern about justice. It is not a loophole for Christian lawlessness. It is a passage about authority under God, public order under God's moral rule, and Christians who live responsibly in the world because they belong first to Christ. That final allegiance matters. Paul will soon say in Romans 13 that the night is far gone and the day is at hand. Believers are to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. That means Romans 13 is not merely about politics. It is about discipleship in public. The Christian life does not withdraw from public responsibility, and it does not hand ultimate trust to public power. It honors what should be honored. It pays what should be paid. It obeys where obedience is faithful. It bears witness when obedience to God requires costly clarity. And through all of it, it remembers that governing authority is real, but not ultimate. Christ is.